today's ruling is just the latest challenge for Marine Le Pen and for her party in what has been decades of efforts to take what was first the National Front and now the National Rally to the status of a mainstream, respected French party. Solange Mougin is with me here in the studio as well to talk a bit about this. And look, Solange, these days, voting for the far right is not as taboo as it certainly as it used to be. Tell us a bit about how this normalisation came about.
Well, the normalizing of the far right is a trend that we see across Europe. It's happening across Europe. And external forces like a collapse of traditional party systems, economic woes, a growing distrust with ruling mainstream parties, they're all big drivers here. But if we focus specifically on this image shift of the national rally, there is a very concerted effort at play, one with multiple strategies. And it has been unfolding for decades. And this verdict is just the latest event that will test these strategies. So, in France, this transformation is often summed up by the term dédiabolisation. The literal translation of this is de-demonizing. You could even say it means normalizing. But it actually goes a bit further than that. It has to do with the Front National, the National Front's origin story, and more significantly, how it rebranded its image today. Election after election, it is still on a quest for mainstream acceptance, pushing these ideas, like our reporters found in 2024, this idea that it has changed.
The National Rally is not what it used to be. Those who say they're shocked by our alliance aren't really right-wing in my mind, because the National Rally is very respectable nowadays.
Now, you could even argue that this dédiabolisation is part of the party's ethos, and it was from the very start. After the horrors of World War II, the far-right and fascist movements were largely rejected, and some historians argue that Jean-Marie Le Pen, he began his movement as a remodeling of fascism, or a dual courting of the bad, while saying that he and his party were different. But the shift from fringe to mainstream really began in the 1980s, when his second-in-command, Bruno Maigret, began to try and position the party as a legitimate political voice. And Marine Le Pen took that move much, much further, changing the party's name and also expelling her father from the party.
Okay, so the name became the National Rally, not the National Front, but that, of course, is not the only strategy to rebrand Marine Le Pen's party.
No, it is the most obvious one, the FN to RN brand switch, all the while retaining the Le Pen name. And some actually even argue that that, too, remains a bit of a liability today, with Jordan Bardella being a solution to that. But I think the prime example of this dédiabolisation, or softening of the party's image, is in its public shift on anti-Semitism. Jean-Marie Le Pen built his notoriety on sexist, racist, and anti-Semitic comments. He repeated again and again what's often referred to in France as l'affaire du détail, or saying that the Holocaust gas chambers were a detail.
I stubbornly say that the gas chambers were a detail in World War II, which is obvious.
Now, Le Pen was condemned and fined by French courts for those comments, but he continually repeated them. And this, among other things, contributed to his daughter expelling him in 2015. Now, Marine Le Pen and the National Rally have since made concerted efforts to deny anti-Semitism, calling her father's remarks barbaric and attending, for example, marches against anti-Semitism. This is very much a part of a strategy to come off as mainstream, as tolerant of others, all the while pushing an anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric. Some political scientists say that the party has essentially swapped a historical scapegoat, or the other that is to blame, for a contemporary one.
Yeah, and let's talk about feminism as well then, Solange, because that also has played a role in the National Rally's efforts to rebrand itself.
Yeah, much focus is often given to young men and their embracing of the far right, but the political analysts also point to how Marine Le Pen managed to come off as relatable to female voters, as an outspoken, straight-talking, divorced woman, and not a sexist, racist old man. So in addition to softening her rhetoric, her gender has helped reshape and normalize her party, image-wise at least, as one that one could see as working class, all the while blaming blaming both the elite and immigrants for voters' problems. And this has helped the far-right party court voters. But she'll now have to contend with how voters feel about her condemnation of misusing public funds. Beyond this, mainstream status has grown with other political parties as well. They're normalizing the far-right through alliances and breaking what's called the cordon sanitaire, or political quarantining of the National Rally. They've contributed, as has media attention, the exposure on TV, social media, and here the RNR is very savvy, and increasingly on far-right or conservative mainstream outlets backed by billionaires like Bolloré.
All right, Solange, before you go, and we need to talk briefly about neckties when we're talking about the National Rally and the instructions to wear them.
Yeah, in 2022, the National Rally won 89 seats in the National Assembly. And Marine Le Pen told her MPs to be, quote, respectful, polite, and wear a necktie. And she has imposed what's called in French the stratégie de la cravate, and it has paid off. Not only did it create a break with altercations and comments of her father's era, but it was also seen as a contrast with the far left's France Unbowed, LFI. Polls show this shift. This has shifted public perception. Ipsos comes out with an annual survey on the fracture française, or breaks in French society. And it found that those polled, they saw LFI, France Unbowed, as more dangerous for democracy than the RN, 64 to 49%. And they also say that it creates more violence, or 68 to 50. This perception difference here is notable because researchers found just the opposite, that in the past 40 years, the far-right activists have killed 9 times more people as far-left ones. But it is a case in point of how there is a shift in appearances and rhetoric, and all of this has contributed to normalizing and rebranding the National Rally. But again, we'll have to see how voters perceive the electronic bracelet and the condemnation. That's still up in the air.